Recently, there was an interview between Alex O'Connor and Brian Greene about the
Multiverse.
What?
Multiverse is real.
They talked about how the multiverse supposedly debunks the fine-tuning argument or debunks the concept of God.
That makes absolutely no sense to me.
Now, me, as a Muslim, I obviously find issues with that. Let's see what they said, and I'll make my response.
In the same way, the physicists might not be able to sort of look beyond the material, but can they look at the fact that if gravity was a tiny little bit stronger, the universe would have collapsed in on itself, and a bit weaker, and everything would have flown apart, and think, I can't see any evidence of design directly, but I can extrapolate from that there must be some kind of intelligence behind the universe.
Often people do say that if you change the value of the physical parameters just a little bit, the universe as we know it goes away. The problem with that is we can only do that analysis if you change the parameters by a little bit. If you allow the parameters to change by a lot of bit, not a little bit, and you allow many of the parameters to change simultaneously, nobody can really say what that cosmos would be like.
Here, Brian Greene is basically using red herring fallacy. The red herring fallacy is basically a malicious form of argument where instead of responding to an argument, you start distracting people with another argument or something else entirely. So the cosmological constant is the energy density of empty space or dark energy. So it is basically the energy that is responsible for the expansion of the universe. So think of it like a fuel that fuels the expansion of the universe, right? Now, if this energy was too much, the universe would expand so fast that everything will be pulled apart. And if it's too slow, the gravity would be too tight and it wouldn't let anything form. And everything will basically collapse on itself. Basically, the actual argument of fine-tuning is that since we have this kind of like cosmological constants and these values, that if we change it a little bit, we don't get the specific universe that we live in, right? The question is about why is it that we have this specific value that led to life on Earth instead of some other value that didn't lead to life on Earth? And so the explanation would be that there is a fine-tuner who finally tuned everything so that there can be life on Earth. But Brian Greene's response is a complete red herring. Like, he doesn't address the argument at all. Because the thing is that no one is arguing that we know what will happen if we change the values by a little. Like, we're not arguing that. That's not what the argument is about. The argument is about why is it that in this universe, we have these specific constants that does lead to life on Earth instead of some other constant that doesn't lead to life on Earth. Like, how do you explain that?
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
And so it's possible that there are patches in parameter space where you would get different kinds of universes that perhaps would give rise to different living systems. And then each living system in its universe looks around and says, wow, this universe is so special. It must be that there's some kind of, grand design that got us here. But they're all saying that in their own parameter space because they're all making this mistake of only looking in a small neighborhood around the point in parameter space where they exist. So that's point number one.
He doesn't realize, but he debunks his own argument. So basically, he says that, well, what if we change this constant by a lot of it? And then we have this other kinds of complex life. And then those life starts asking this question that, why is everything so finely tuned, right? How do you explain this? What he doesn't realize is that for those life to ask this question is actually completely valid because their parameters have been changed, which means in this analogy that he uses, there is actually a fine-tuner. So he refutes his own argument in his attempt to show that no, it's just a ridiculous notion. He actually uses an analogy that has a fine-tuner.
But it is the motivation for the multiverse, another motivation, because one explanation simply would be there are many, 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 many universes in which the parameters have all different values across those many universes. And in most of those universes, the conditions are not amenable to living systems like human beings. But in one of those, or a small number of those universes, the conditions are amenable. And of course, we're in one of those universes because we could not exist in any of the others because the conditions are not correct.
So basically, this is the argument that is often presented by atheists to kind of like debunk the fine-tuning argument, which is to say that the reason such constants exist is not because God exists, but because there is this infinite number of universes. It just happens to be the case that we live in one of those universes in this multiverse where it does support life. This is a very bad response to the fine-tuning argument. First of all, even if I accept this concept of the multiverse, it leads to a problem, which is that infinity leads to contradiction. What? For example, let's say that there is a multiverse that has infinite number of universes. Let's do a simple thought experiment. Let's take 5 universes out of those universes. How many universes are there? It's still infinite. So here you're both taking away universes and not taking away universes at the same time. So it's a contradiction. It's not logically possible.
Oh no!
Right? For there to be a multiple infinite number of universes. Let's say that a multiverse does exist and it's not necessarily infinite, but it's a very large number. Even then, it doesn't debunk the fine-tuning argument. That's because we know that this universe has a cosmological constant, right? It should logically follow that all these other universes also have these constants, right, that are different than ours. Then the totality of these universes must also have some kind of constant, right? So basically the multiverse must have some kind of constant or some kind of quality that either leads to the creation of our universe or leads to the maintenance of our universe. So then the question becomes, why is it that this multiverse or this quality or constant of this multiverse led to the creation of life on Earth, on our universe, instead of it having some other constant or quality that didn't lead to life on Earth? So you're back on the same problem. Right? So this way, this argument actually doesn't refute anything. It just moves the goalpost further along, right? But there's also another objection that can be made for this, which is the scientific one, right? So in case you guys don't know, in quantum physics, there is a theory. It is known as the Great Observer theory. So basically, the theory postulates, basically particles around us are not in a fixed state, and they only become fixed when they're observed, right? So, so basically, this is also the position of the anti-realist movement in the scientific community, who believes that the particles don't have a fixed property, but rather they become fixed when they're observed, right? And this is something that is actually proven through the double slit experiment. Basically, in the experiment, there are these two kind of like holes, right? Hole or split, right? Then a particle is thrown from one of them. So logically speaking, the particle should move in a forward trajectory, right? But what's interesting is that when the scientists, they're not using detectors in the experiment, the particles actually act like waves. And basically, they kind of spread around and they go through both holes, right? But what's funny is that when the scientists, they actually use detectors, the particles actually act like normal particles. So here, it's almost as if the particles know that they're being watched and they're behaving differently based on whether they're watched or not. The experiment lends credence to the anti-realist position or the quantum physics position that says that, that particles are not in a fixed state, but they become fixed when they're observed. But this theory kind of creates problems in the scientific community or for logic as a whole, because the thing is that if this is really the case that, particles are not fixed, then does that mean that when I'm not watching like this cell phone that I have in front of me, doesn't mean it disappears or like it doesn't exist? Like it's a very strange kind of like theory, right? It seems like a very strange idea. And this is where the concept of the great observer comes in, which is that some people postulates that the reason why everything doesn't become chaotic like this, because we know that this cell phone will exist even if I look away. The idea here is that there's this great observer who is watching everything to make sure that his particles behave in a fixed manner when we observe them. However, here's the thing. This theory actually creates a massive problem for the multiverse explanation of the fine-tune, which is that if you're going to use the multiverse to refute, so-called refute the fine-tuning argument, while it may refute the fine-tuning argument from like an external sense, like our normal observable universe, it doesn't refute it on a quantum realm. In the quantum realm, things are completely chaotic. So then how do you explain this using the multiverse, right? You can't. However, if you accept the great observer theory or the fine-tuning argument of God's existence, then it does explain it, because, God is the one who designed it and he's the one who's making sure that things act accordingly. However, when we try to look at the back door, if you will, things act a bit differently, where maybe God created things more differently than how he has created things for us, right? So this way, the fine-tuning actually reconciles this problem. But you cannot reconcile this problem using the multiverse.
Bada bop boom pow.
You know, the analogy is if you go into a clothing shop and you want to buy a sports coat, and you say, I want to buy a sports coat, and you see only one on the rack, and the person brings it over and it fits you perfectly. You're like, wow, that is so fortunate that it was just the right size to fit me. But if you go into an actual clothing shop, when there's hundreds of different sports jackets on the rack of all different sizes, when the person comes and brings you one that fits, you're not surprised. Of course, there's one among the many that works for you.
He uses a logical fallacy known as the false analogy fallacy. He uses an analogy that just doesn't work. When it comes to clothes, right? Clothes are designed specifically so that people wear them, right? So here, again, when it comes to the clothes, there is a fine-tuner, right? Like people, like fashion designers, they specifically design clothes so that people wear them, right? So of course, the chances of you going to a clothing shop and finding a cloth just the perfect fit for you is very, very high. But that's not the case for the universe, right? Where basically nothing exists and they just happen to somehow come together, form these constants that leads to this complex life on Earth that just doesn't work, right? A more accurate analogy would be, let's say you go to space, right? And there's nothing in space, right? There's absolutely nothing there. You're in deep space, right? And there's absolutely nothing there. Then all of a sudden, while you're in deep space, you see this beautiful jacket that's just perfect for you, right? And you pick up this jacket and you wear this jacket and you wonder to yourself, like, this jacket is perfect. It has my name on it. It's the perfect color, everything. Where did this jacket come from, right? It's completely valid in that case for you to ask that question, right? And that would be a more accurate analogy to the situation here.
Yeah. If I went into a shop and they had a sports jacket in just my size, I'd feel pretty special. I'd feel pretty chuffed about that. If I discovered that actually they'd gone into the back and picked from a billion different possible suit jacket sizes, I'd be a little disappointed by that. I'd be kind of upset. Do you feel a bit nihilistic at the prospect that it seems amazing, everything is perfectly tuned for us, but actually maybe not? Maybe we just happen to be in one of billions of universes.
I guess that's not where my self-worth comes from. You know, I sort of don't look at the specialness of the universe or my place within that special universe. Rather, what fires me up is the fact that a collection of particles called a human brain, which is all that we are, collections of particles, can coalesce through an evolutionary dynamics to yield a structure that can think and feel and love and emote and create and illuminate and figure out quantum mechanics and figure out general relativity and come up with the idea of a multiverse and describe black holes and predict the magnetic moment of the electron. And that, to me, is the amazing thing.
So basically here, he's just promoting this kind of like nonsense ideology that many atheists hold on to, which is, materialism, which is that there's nothing beyond the material or the physical. So because of that, he's saying that, Alex is asking him like, oh, don't you feel like depressed of thinking about how your life has no meaning, basically? And he's like, no, I don't think like that. Or like that the universe just happens to be one in an infinite number of universes. Don't you like feel depressed about that? And he's like, no, I don't feel depressed about it at all, because like what I find fascinating is that, they're just these particles, they're just, coming together by themselves and just working by themselves to create these complex thoughts by themselves. And what's funny is that he goes from materialist to instantly spiritualist. He does a complete 360 degree. And this is the great technique of the atheist, right? This is how they fool people. This is how they con people. They con people by going from a hard materialist to all of a sudden be a spiritualist, right? Because the thing is that if you really believe that there's nothing beyond the material, there's nothing beyond the particle, then there's no such thing as love. There's no such thing as wonder. There's no such thing as amazement. These things don't exist, right? These are not physical things. These are not made of particles. They're just things in your head. Like, they don't exist actually, right? So these are just hallucinations you're having in your collection of particles, and that's it. It's just a hallucination, or just a chemical reaction, right? And that's it. There's nothing else to it. He acts as if like that's not a contradiction to his idea of materialism, but they're completely at odds with each other. These two things doesn't go along with each other at all. So he's like a walking contradiction. They're confusing their own position with another position that is completely contradictory to their position. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys like the video, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And please do remember to subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot, a great deal. So please subscribe, and inshallah, see you next time, inshallah. And if you want to support me, you can support me by becoming a Patreon or ET member. And yeah, inshallah, see you guys next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.